My name is Fiyin Oladiran. I like, you know, I've had two careers, right? I trained as a physician, worked as a physician both in clinical practice and in the pharmaceutical sector. And then about 15 years ago, slightly under 15 years ago, I made a switch into management consulting, where I serve leading business and private, public, social sector leaders to solve relatively challenging problems, typically organizational-wide transformation efforts. I'm based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And maybe that's a little bit about myself. I'm married. I have 4 young kids. And I guess with everybody in this stage of life, especially, I'm assuming at least in this stage of life for myself, I'm thinking around, my thinking over the last couple of months had been, am I doing all I can to maximize on the assets that I have? What are my assets? My assets are my skill set, the role and the position I've been given, and of course the income that comes with that. And am I doing all I can to make sure that I am setting not just myself, my family, and the generations that follow up in the best possible way? Before I get into even the specifics of kind of what my experience has been with Springwell, maybe just to buttress that point, I do a lot of work around economic mobility, which is around how society enables individuals, households to move from a certain income and wealth bracket and move up, right? We've heard of the term American dream, and that's what I do day to day. And a couple of months ago, I had to ask myself, am I solving my own and my generation's economic mobility challenge? And that was what led me to Springwell Consulting. So maybe now to just pivot into my experience and the journey I've been on with Springwell. Firstly, prior to engaging with Springwell, I would like to think, a relatively sophisticated investor, where, I have invested in, several market instruments, right? Unit trusts, been involved in private markets. So, I've done a couple of things in my personal capacity. What I've not done a lot of had been, firstly, individual stocks, partly because of the challenge with being a management consultant and you want to manage conflicts of interest. And then secondly is real estate. When I started engaging with Springwell during the introductory conversation, the first thing I shared with them was that I had never made money from real estate, despite being involved in, I think, about 4 transactions, primarily in South Africa. So that's kind of where my starting point was. It was not an issue of terminology. It was not an issue of having not invested or dipped my feet into investing. It was a real question around, am I doing all I can? And especially in the area of real estate, do I really understand how people make returns and how they build wealth? So if I step back and then say, okay, what has the journey been? What were some of the strides and steps that I gleaned from my engagement with Springwell? The first was really just helping to kind of set solid foundations, get the basics right? We had conversations like, what is the why of why I'm doing what I'm doing? Like, what is the why? And the reality is I had not pondered that deeply about the whys. And, the whys ranges from, hey, I'm thinking about my children and how to safeguard their education. I'm thinking about, what happens to our standard of living, if I were to take a bit of a step back, if I'm not able to operate at the pace I'm operating at, if we want to have a different set of experiences, and then of course there's then the generational wealth topics that we spoke about, right? And so just getting those foundations right. The foundations such as, am I looking to do this full time? Am I looking to do this, on the side? For me, it was very simple. I love what I do. I feel called to my current profession, and so I am thoroughly satisfied there. But I wanted to be able to do this on the side. I also was very clear on the capacity that I would have to be able to engage, right, in reality, and therefore needed to put all the pieces of the puzzles together. We then moved, once we got the foundations right, we then moved to the next level, which was then understanding the components of the investor, right? What are as I thought about the investments, as I thought about the different categories of investments, being able to understand firstly the pieces there, and then connecting those dots very directly to my why, right? So that was another piece of work that we did together. And the third piece was then very, very practical and pragmatic, and I really enjoyed this, which was then, okay, let's go end to end through the investment cycle, right? All the way from I understood my why, I understood the categories of assets that were available. And so the question was then, how do I then engage in the end-to-end process? And we literally week by week, in a field and forum way, went through the investment cycle. What I mean by field and forum, we had a session, typically 2 hours, 2.5 hours session, where we went into the data. We did a bunch of analytics. We understood, the context, for example, around different geographies, different dynamics driving that micro market, right? And we were then able to make a couple of decisions, right? Because I got the insights. By the way, it was excellent having a coach that was able to then challenge some of my thinking, bring in expertise and experience to help with the richness of the facts I had to make decisions. And we went end to end till the end of the investment cycle, where at the end of the journey, I had landed on, this is the type of asset class, this is the geography, this is my team and the resources I need, these are some investment options, these are the trade-offs, these are the economics, how does that connect with my why? And literally the next step is to then execute on the transaction. And we spent time then discussing, engaging, making trade-offs around, making decisions around trade-offs regarding elements of the transactions. How do I think about loan to value? How do I think about down payments? How do I think about how to finance it, the down payment? So I think just pulling all of that together has been fantastic. One of the things that blew my mind was being able to, in the forum, understand something, get out into the field during the week, practice it, and then realize how correlated what we spoke about was to what I was finding, and being able to then come back into the next forum and share some of those insights, and almost like building a house brick by brick, where I came in at the beginning of the engagement with a lot of questions. At the end of the engagement, I had a house that was clearly built. And when I say house, I'm talking about the proverbial conceptual house versus a physical house. But I leave the engagement with a lot of tools, a lot of confidence and clarity to what I want to do and to why I'm doing what I want to do. Now, when I think about specifically Mr. Wesley Ogude, who was the lead consultant and I had the privilege to interact with during the forums, firstly, his own journey has been phenomenal, right? There's nothing better than learning from somebody that has walked the shoes that you want to walk, and to then be able to glean insights directly from the, as the saying says, the horse's mouth, right? So it was just great to learn directly from his own experience. He was incredibly generous. He was generous with knowledge. He was generous with illustrations. He was generous with, literally saying, hey, look at the contract we signed. This asset, this is what happened. This was the experience. This was the mistake I made. If I could go back, I would do this differently. Just getting those insights was very encouraging. It was motivating, and quite frankly, I looked forward to each of the sessions we would have to kind of build on what I had experienced during the week. I must say, as a husband, as a father, what was also very powerful in my interaction with Mr. Wesley that I did not expect and I did not bargain for, and quite frankly, if that's all I got, was totally worth the investment, was how he incorporates the principles into his family life. How he approaches wealth building and incorporating that with his family life, his wife and his partner, his children. That challenged me in not just how I'm building wealth, but how I am leading and showing up in my home as a father and as a husband. So if it's not clear to you by now, from what I've shared, let me be very explicit. I would totally recommend Springwell to professionals, to leaders like myself. Be professional, entrepreneurial. The reality is, we are exposed to a lot, but we don't know what we don't know. And an engagement with Springwell will unearth several of these insights and enable you to build on what you already are doing. So I'm excited for the journey ahead. I know that my journey with Springwell is just starting, and I'm looking forward to sharing more about that journey over the weeks, the months, and the years to come. Thank you for listening to me.